What do you understand consent to be, or what do you view as consent?
So I view consent as you agreeing to something being done to you.
Okay, well, first of all, I think in any situation that requires you to give or take from someone, I think that consent is required, and that is, asking permission from somebody before you do certain things.
Well, for me, I think consent is given permission to do something from one party or from both parties that you want to be involved or active in doing something.
Yeah, some sort of communication, whether verbal or non-verbal, to allow for like permission to do something.
And so, do you think consent is like a requirement, or is just an additional thing that you can do?
Oh, of course,
That might be
it's
a
It is a
requirement.
requirement.
And so, what are some situations that you think consent is needed in?
Well, consent is needed in like intimate situations and physical touch.
I think in any sort of sexual or intimate relationship with anybody, you require consent. I think that certain relationships, depending what you're asking, between family members, between peers, between people you don't know, acquaintances, those things require consent.
I think consent is needed in everyday life in many things. For example, something as simple as participating in an activity to, let's say, go into the hospital or engaging in other activities with other parties involved.
So, do you think that someone who's under the influence of alcohol can consent, and if so, why or why not?
No, I don't think they can consent because when you're under alcohol, your mind is like corrupted, so you can't fully make decisions that might truly reflect how you feel.
Yeah, because, well, when you're under the influence, right, you're not very aware of the things you do. Sometimes you don't remember, sometimes you don't have control over some of the things you do or say, so I think that should be taken with a grain of salt.
I do not think they will be able to consent because if they are under the influence of any substance or something of that matter, I don't think you'll be able be in their right senses to be able to give that consent.
I also agree. Consent should be given from a sound mind.
So, if a minor agrees to have sexual relations or an intimate relationship with an adult, is that still consent? What are your thoughts on that kind of situation?
Well, I don't think so because a minor can't give consent, so the consent will be invalid.
I would not agree that the consent will still apply because as the adult in this relationship, they would be fully well aware that it's a minor that they're engaging in. So I don't think that will be able to set the boundaries of giving consent.
Okay.
I think it depends on ages of consent. Like, if it were like legally speaking, if they were together but the minor was above the age of consent, and technically their consent still matters.
And so, since you said that, consent usually applies to like intimate relations or intimate situations, do you think that consent can be revoked?
I think at any point in time, you can say that you're uncomfortable with something.
If you could say no, your mind tells you, "Oh, I don't want this anymore." You should be allowed to say no in any situation or any time.
Okay, thank you. And what do you consider to be nonverbal consent?
I mean, there are certain gestures, definitely, but I feel like just as long as both parties ensure that they're adequately communicating with each other, nodding or gestures along that line, yeah.
I would think that consent should be verbal. It should be like firm, and then so you can never be mistaken. Okay, I give. You can't just guess that somebody gave you consent to do this. You can ask them and let them firmly answer you. So that's what I believe.
From my understanding, I think nonverbal consent is stuff like nodding your head or giving like body language actions to show that you do consent to something.
Yeah, nonverbal consent can definitely exist because there are individuals in this world who are nonverbal, aka they can't talk. So, sign language.
Okay. And do you think that power dynamics can influence consent?
Well, yes, because a teacher or somebody superior of you might feel that you have to agree with them because they're older and they're wiser in certain situations. So if they say this is right, you might agree with them and like lose your trust to them.
It's definitely like has like some characteristics of peer pressure where there isn't actually a big pressure, but it's just like you want to feel like you're like with your like you do get what's going on, you want to seem older, so it means like there could be that pressure, like, oh, I'm gonna do this because I don't want him to see bad with me, or I don't want him to take me as like a little kid, or I know maybe they think that there could be implied consequences, like if I say no to this, then what's gonna happen like
Like
later
get
down
fired
in our
or-
like relationship, or in like the influence they have over my life, stuff like that.
I agree with Janata. It is kind of like pressured, so kind of like pressured consent is not really consent to their full knowledge without them knowing.
I don't care how old you are compared to your partner. I think that you should always ask consent. The teacher, student, and employee boss is a little bit tricky because I feel like nowadays there's like a blur between like, okay, the level of authority. So some people just naturally assume that they could ask whatever. I do think that in both of those instances, they should still ask consent before asking some people to do some things. Like, you know how some teachers would sometimes ask assistance of students, even though it's not necessarily required of them. Same thing with an employee and their boss, you know?
Yeah. And so the last question is kind of personal, so you can choose not to answer it or not. But the question is, have you ever been in a situation where even though you didn't consent to something, it still happened? And if so, would you like to share about it?
Yeah, I have. I mean, you know, if we're talking between friends, you know, I mean, like sometimes there are some instances when, you know, sometimes your friends ask or do things that might make you feel uncomfortable, and you know, sometimes I feel like you should just voice that, no matter if you're friends or not, that they should respect your boundaries. Same thing, I feel like nowadays, relationship-wise, I feel like a lot of the time between like relationships between men and women, a lot of the time men aren't as vigilant where it comes to their partners. They're like in the moment a lot of the time, and sometimes they act without thinking, and that could sometimes cause their partner to be uncomfortable with some of the things that they do.
I have not experienced that.
I don't think I have either that, or maybe I just forgot it. Okay.